So I'm Steve Faulkner as Chief of the Aquatic Ecology Lab here at the USGS Leetown Science Center. I was Tim King's colleague and supervisor. Tim was always a lot of fun to work with, and like a lot of bright scientists, he always had a lot of great ideas. He was always putting them into practice, which as a supervisor kept me quite busy. I think one of Tim's greatest attributes was his vision. He not only saw opportunities to employ science and support of conservation, but he could implement them and get them funded and actually make things happen at a pretty large scale, looking out quite a ways.
What do you think Tim's greatest contribution to the fisheries profession was?
Well, anybody familiar with Tim's work know he published all kinds of papers. He's very prolific in that regard on a large variety of different species and a large diversity of topics. And so I guess this kind of goes back to my original time of when I first met Tim. Was he had a real passion for getting people that are responsible for management of threatened and endangered species, and to have to incorporate genetic data into their research. So he was always a strong proponent of utilizing data that you can get from genetics into decision making for conservation. So I think, to me, that was his biggest contribution, was that, and that was the focus of most of his research, was how to use genetics to help with conservation planning.
I think Tim's greatest contribution to the fisheries profession was his ability to help translate conservation genetics and genomics to fisheries practitioners, both taking samples from them that they collect in the field, having our laboratory group genotype fish, and then he would run a lot of analyses and really help educate practitioners on how to translate those results into decision-relevant information that could be applied to conservation actions in the field. And he was incredibly patient while doing that.
So I'm a little bit biased on this one, so I'm going to say it's sturgeon, the genetic information that he provided to us for Atlantic and short-nosed sturgeon. I worked with him mostly on Atlantic sturgeon, and he worked on our status review for us and helped to define the distinct population segments of Atlantic sturgeon. And he also was really instrumental in figuring out how to analyze short-nosed sturgeon genetics. They're really complicated because they're polymorphic, and he really had a keen interest in sturgeon, so he worked really hard to be able to give us the genetic information that we needed to really look at the population structure. So I think that, to me, is his greatest professional achievement.
One of Tim's biggest achievements was in Atlantic salmon genetics, and he received the U.S. Geological Survey Service Award for his contributions. And that work was instrumental in helping federal managers conserve and restore Atlantic salmon.
So you spoke very highly about his personality, his work ethic, his contributions to the fisheries profession. What do you think was his best overall character trait?
Tim was, like I said, when I first met him in person, I realized that not only was he a good scientist, but he was a good person. And so his interest in family, always interested in the person he was talking to. And one of the things, too, is a lot of times in science, people can feel like you're stepping on their toes. And so sometimes people can be territorial. And when I came to West Virginia and I was going to be doing conservation genetics, that could have been a concern, but I knew that wasn't a concern with Tim. He was such a genuinely nice person that I knew he would want to mentor me and usher me in. So I think that really, he was just a genuinely good person in addition to being a good scientist.
I think one of things I liked best about Tim was he always kept me on my toes. He was always in motion. He never really wanted to slow down. He always saw the possibilities of things that could be, and really worked hard to make those happen. When Tim first arrived at the U.S. Geological Survey, there was no conservation genetics program. So Tim really built that program from scratch, identified ways it could be used by conservation managers, federal managers, was able to get support both internally and externally to build what was really a center of excellence here at Leetown. And the impacts of that program will be felt for a long time to come.
And what was Tim's best character trait?
His patience. He's always really nice and explaining, taking the time to really explain the genetic information to people who aren't geneticists and help them to understand, what he was seeing and what he thought we should be doing next. So he's always really patient with all of us that aren't geneticists and didn't have the breadth of knowledge that he had.
So I've known Tim for a few years, got to know him pretty well, and I think the one trait that stuck with me from working with Tim was his really strong work ethic. So he was incredibly focused and devoted to conservation genetics. So I remember a story he told me from when he was in grad school when he ran his first starch gel proteins, way back in the day when people were still doing that, and how excited he got. He was like, well, that's what I'm going to do. That's what does it for me. And he said he was hooked after that, and he just had a real passion for that. So I guess one trait for him that at least helped him professionally was that devotion and strong work ethic. But that doesn't mean that he had other things that were important to him. He was also very devoted to his family and proud of talking about them. You could always count on Tim to tell you a story about his sons or other family members. He was always very proud of them and talking about them and thinking about them even when he was at work.
And I think my sentiments are similar. I would say Tim's best character trait as a scientist was his outstanding work ethic, and Tim worked tirelessly for years and years and years, and he loved doing what he did, and he loved using genetics and genomics to help answer conservation questions. And it was just amazing to me how hard he worked, and he never complained about it. He just kept on chugging and kept on doing science and loved every minute of it. One of the things that really struck me about Tim was when he got his hands on a new data set, it was like a kid coming down the stairs on Christmas morning. He was just so excited to analyze it and unravel the secrets and information inside, and it just, that very visibly energized him. And that was pretty neat to see.
And what was the most memorable time that you shared with him?
So that's a hard question because there's lots of good memories of Tim. So I have two, can I do two?
Mm-hmm.
Is that all right? So I have one that I think probably a lot of other people are actually going to have as well, and that's that Tim loved to present on what he was doing, and he was often very hard to get off the stage when he was up there doing a presentation. And we organized a sturgeon workshop back a couple of years ago, and I was moderating the session, and Tim was up there doing an Atlantic sturgeon presentation. And I was trying several very subtle ways to get him off, when his time was getting close to being up, and I wasn't having any success. And I basically needed a shepherd hook to kind of get him off the stage and let the presentations go on. So that's one. And then another one was at the AFS meeting when we were in Nashville, Tennessee. We went out after the meeting was over, and a bunch of us went up to dance, and one of my friends had this big yellow pocketbook, and Tim said that he would watch it for her. So he basically stood there probably about an hour holding her big yellow pocketbook in this bar. We kept looking over at him and trying to get him to come out and dance with us, but he was totally satisfied just standing there holding that big yellow pocketbook. So that's a great memory of Tim as well.
And the funny thing about Tim too is that whenever he would come to a talk, he always had too many slides. So I remember I was having him give a seminar here at WVU, and it was about a 40-minute presentation. And he comes in and he says, "Okay, I have 130 slides for my presentation." I thought, "Oh my gosh, 130 slides!" But that was classic Tim. I mean, his standard for a 20-minute presentation, he would easily have 60 slides ready for that. And it's the funny thing is he started to catch on that this was a problem, and then if you've seen any recent presentations from Tim, he would start off by saying, "Okay, I'm going to start with my results," and he would actually show his results first because he said, "I never get to the end of my presentation." So he started putting his results in discussion actually at the beginning of his presentation. And with Tim gone soon, you just can't help to think he didn't get to all the slides. You know, and you wonder if he had stuck around, what were on the slides to come. And it really makes you think his presentation was cut short this time.
You know, one of the other things that he was really good about professionally was staying at the very forefront of his field and trying to incorporate new methods and analyses into what he could do to help conservation questions. So one of the things that Tim instilled in me through mentoring was not being afraid to use new technologies and to learn about new technologies. So in the sequencing world over the past few years, there's been this explosion of big data and bioinformatics. So from my background of just basic population genetics type analyses, moving to some of these computer scripting challenges and analyses of metagenomic data sets and things like that, it is very good about fostering an interest and encouraging working on new kinds of problems. I don't know if I can remember any specific words of wisdom, but often when I'm sitting in my office, I can still hear him talking to me, telling me different things to do and try. So the spirit is definitely still around here. So.
And for me, Tim was a very patient mentor with me. My background was some of the more traditional sides of fisheries science and population dynamics, and I wanted to learn the genetic side of the equation, and Tim saw in me what I wasn't sure I had in me, and as a result, I'm a better scientist and working on some really cool projects that are kind of integrating population dynamics and genetics and really melding both of our perspectives in ways that I think are really neat. So I'm a better scientist for having known him.
One of, I think, Tim's highest honors was the U.S. Geological Survey Superior Service Award that he received in 2002 as a result of his work on Atlantic salmon. This at a time was when federal managers really needed good genetic information in order to support endangered species listings for the Atlantic salmon, and Tim provided really the essential information, scientific information necessary to support those management decisions at a time when that kind of science wasn't necessarily readily accepted in those arenas. So we will continue to hopefully live up to Tim's legacy with the platform that he set for us, and his contributions both as a scientist and as a colleague and a friend will be remembered for a long time.